Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Police are making a record number of arrests in Alberta in connection with child exploitation offences. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is not impressed with the Liberals' new budget. He will explain why. And Albertans who are wanting to holiday in British Columbia right now will be turned away at the border. We have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The jury in the Derek Chauvin murder trial of George Floyd reached a verdict and found Chauvin guilty on all 3 counts. Chauvin was found guilty of second and third degree murder, along with second degree manslaughter in the death of George Floyd. His bail was revoked, and he'll remain in custody until his sentencing hearing in 8 weeks. The former Minneapolis police officer could face up to 75 years in prison. Chauvin was one of 4 police officers who arrived on the scene after a store clerk alleged that Floyd was passing around a counterfeit $20 bill. As the situation escalated, Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck and back for about 9.5 minutes, which led to his death. Following Floyd's death, protests against police brutality, especially toward black people, spread across much of the United States and around the world. As protests in Minneapolis, Minnesota intensify following the shooting of 20-year-old Dante Wright by a female police officer, a group of black men joined the crowd intent on keeping the peace and to prevent the protests from escalating into violence. American correspondent Lisa Daftari has been following this story closely. Lisa, hundreds gathered outside of a heavily guarded Brooklyn Center police station. Unrest continues with tear gas being launched and arrests being made since former police officer Kim Potter fatally shot Mr. Wright.
A group has gathered there. They're calling themselves the Freedom Fighters. They wear a yellow star patch, and they are introducing themselves as this elite security squad that has to protect the community from this police brutality. Again, you know how they're calling this systemic, they're calling this racism, and you know, obviously the police there in Minneapolis is looking at reforming. They have a 4-step reform program for the police to not look at race, obviously, and to deal with the random traffic stops differently if they can.
Now, 2 Minnesota National Guardsmen were injured following a drive-by shooting that also occurred in Minneapolis over the weekend. They were providing neighborhood security at the time of the shooting.
These freedom fighters who have called themselves peaceful protesters and have called for peaceful protests, well, sometimes it hasn't been all that peaceful. There have been attacks against the National Guard that has been called in, against the extra officers that have been, the police presence that has really been beefed up, obviously, because of the night after night protests that have been going on there. We hope that this doesn't escalate, and we hope that the calls for real peaceful protests and real dialogue take over what is occurring right now.
There have been a record number of arrests in Alberta this year in connection with online sexual exploitation of children. Alert's Internet Child Exploitation Unit says 24 suspects have been charged with 60 offenses. Each of the suspects was charged with at least 1 child pornography offense. Alert says last year, there was a 40% increase in the number of case referrals with over 2,100 intakes, and it hasn't slowed down so far this year. The province is addressing the issue and has provided more funding to double the size of the ICE unit with more investigators, forensic technicians, and analysts. Alberta's finance minister says the province is pleased to see investments in carbon capture and storage capacity in the new federal budget. But Travis Taves says Alberta has concerns about the details, specifically the exclusion of enhanced oil recovery projects with a net zero carbon profile. Ottawa says it will soon begin consultations on designing a tax credit for capital spent on carbon capture and storage technology in hopes of increasing how many million tons Canada traps annually. Taves also says he's disappointed that the Liberals are not retroactively lifting the cap on the fiscal stabilization program. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says the Liberal government's budget is simply a letdown. O'Toole says the budget should have focused on a plan to return our country back to normal.
The budget tabled by the Liberals today is an incredible letdown for Canadians. Canada's Conservatives were very clear that we wanted to see the plan to return to normal in this budget that would secure jobs for all Canadians in all parts of the country. Mr. Trudeau failed to put forward a plan to help Canadians, and he's leaving them behind. That is why the Conservatives will be proposing amendments and our own policies, because we feel this falls so incredibly short. We're prepared to vote against it if that's what we come to as a team, David, but there's not the pressure that there normally is because the NDP have already said they will in some form support the budget. With risks of inflation on the horizon, no plan for large sectors of our economy, no serious plan to help save the tens of thousands of small businesses hanging on by a thread. We have real concerns that there's no fiscal anchor and that they've put out several potential debt to GDP ratios that, quite frankly, we don't see a plan for the Liberals to even get close to achieving.
The Canadian Wildlife Federation is pleased with the federal Liberals' budget. The budget includes $2.3 billion over 5 years to conserve up to 1 million square kilometres more land and inland waters. This will help achieve Canada's goal of 25% of protected area by the year 2025. Ottawa also announced $647 million over 5 years to conserve wild Pacific salmon through investments in research and habitat restoration, and close to $977 million over 5 years to help protect our oceans. The newly released federal budget includes more than $100 million in new spending over the next 3 years, targeting a wide variety of voters. Now, the new spending will put Canada's net debt at more than $1 trillion for the first time ever. Some political pundits are wondering if all of the Liberal spending initiatives is a precursor to a spring election.
This is an election budget. The timing remains to be seen, probably reliant on the extent of the vaccine rollout and the state of the pandemic. Mr. Trudeau does not wish to be in the same position as the Premier of Newfoundland, who mistakenly called an election in the middle of the second wave and ended up with a total administrative fiasco on his hands. So, but there's enough money in this for the Liberals to campaign on and be Santa Claus 6 months before Christmas.
The budget was Chrystia Freeland's first since becoming federal finance minister. Monday was the first official day Alberta has offered the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine to those 40 years of age or older. Previously, the age of eligibility was 55. More than 70 pharmacies in Alberta are offering the vaccine, including 2 walk-in clinics. More than 2 million Albertans now have had a chance of being vaccinated. Alberta Health Services South Zone Medical Lead Officer of Health, Dr. Vivian Suttorp, spoke about what lowering the age means for Albertans.
We have seen, and I just actually checked appointment bookings, and that the appointments are being filled quickly for those vaccines here in Lethbridge and across South Zone. There is an increasing number of pharmacies by the day that were registering and offering the vaccine. So I think the best option is to look online to see where those immunization clinics are that are closest to you, where individuals would like to be immunized. Phased rollout of immunization and vaccine supply. So that's the biggest challenge, is the vaccine supply and then rolling that out across the province. And so by expanding this age group to 40, we are enabling more individuals to have the opportunity to be immunized.
As of Sunday, Alberta had administered just over 100,000 AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine shots. Lethbridge City Council unanimously approved the development of a Community Wellbeing and Safety Task Force. The initiative comes after residents expressed their biggest concern in the community is related to the ongoing drug crisis and social issues. The objective is to collaborate with community leaders to make key changes on the issue.
Certainly the businesses, so many who expressed concerns at the public hearing, as I said, the downtown BRZ, the Chamber of Commerce, but individual business owners and investors in the city. We've heard from Indigenous groups, stakeholders, and community organizations who provide services in the city. So having religious groups, for example, faith-based groups, being part of the solution as well.
Local restaurants can now apply for municipal funding to help bring their customers to outdoor patios and parklets. Council approved up to $40,000 in funding to provide businesses with a 50% matching grant up to $1,000 for improvements to accommodate the outdoor seating during the pandemic.
We are hearing from businesses, and we'd only had opportunities available to businesses in the downtown, and so council members have been hearing from other businesses saying we would like to take advantage of the same opportunities, and why should there be discrimination? Why do you have to be located in only one aspect of the city, one location in the city? So Council has responded, and now the program will be available citywide.
The Nikiyuko Bunka Center is the new proposed name for a cultural facility that's parked next to Henderson Lake and the Nikiyuko Japanese Garden. Now, the name Bunka means culture in Japanese. As Micah Quinn explains, the center is on budget and expected to be completed by the end of the summer.
The budget for the facility is $2,920,000, and so far, the total cost of construction has come in at $896,000.
We started this process in 2010 with a lot of market research, engaging our stakeholders, volunteers or staff members to say, okay, what do we need to do to move Nikiyuko forward as an organization? And it was quickly apparent that we needed more indoor space.
The new facility will host meetings and event rental spaces for up to 100 people.
So they can have their own special cultural days or anniversaries or weddings or gatherings. We also needed 2 programming spaces, which will assist us with ongoing experiences for indoors and for school tours. We get a lot of school tours. It was communicated that the Henderson Lake users would love that stop and go or have a coffee or a tea.
There will also be a dedicated exhibit space to tell the story of the Nikiyuko Japanese Garden,
as well as a timeline showing the story of those of Japanese ancestry's connections to Southern Alberta, and a timeline of their story from Okinawa pre-war, post-war, and continuing to today when we have a lot of those of Japanese ancestry moving to Southern Alberta.
The final name of the center will be fully decided at a future City Council meeting. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Albertans who are hoping to get away to BC for a holiday in the next few weeks will have to rethink their travel plans. BC is imposing travel restrictions to try and reduce the spread of the novel coronavirus. The government has been working with the tourism industry and BC Ferries to cancel bookings that have already been made. They're also not accepting any new ones from those living outside of the intended destination. BC Premier John Horgan says he also wants to see British Columbians stay within their own regions as to not spread the COVID-19 virus.
On Friday, Minister Mike Farnworth will issue orders under the Emergency Program Act to restrict people's ability to leave their health authority. This will be conducted through random audits, not unlike roadside stops for counterattack during the Christmas season. They will be susceptible to all travelers, not just a few travelers. And again, they will be random, and there will be a fine if you are traveling outside of your area without a legitimate reason. In addition, we'll be putting new border signs along the Alberta border, reminding our travelers coming from outside the province that unless they're coming for essential business, they should not be here. They should be back in their home communities.
The Saskatchewan government says it will be expanding options for virtual health care. It says doctors had more than 1.7 million virtual appointments with their patients between March and December of last year. Health Minister Paul Merriman says the province will work to expand video conferencing, remote patient monitoring, and electronic health records. Saskatchewan is to receive almost $5.6 million in federal funding for improvements. Essential workers who have to cross the Canada-U.S. border in Manitoba are going to be receiving their COVID-19 vaccine. The governments of Manitoba and North Dakota struck a deal that will see vaccines provided to commercial truckers from the province. Premier Brian Pallister says he hopes to expand the initiative to other essential workers who cross the border for work. Pallister says up to 4,000 Manitoba truckers could be eligible for the shots, which are to be delivered at a rest stop south of the border. Manitoba's public health officer, Dr. Brent Rusin, says due to rising COVID-19 cases, his province will be tightening restrictions. That will include family get-togethers, worship services, and capacity at retail stores.
So this includes a return to allowing only 2 designated individuals per household, again with certain exceptions. We're limiting outdoor gatherings on public and private property to 10 people maximum, and that includes the same household in that count. We are reducing capacity at faith-based and cultural gatherings to 25% or 50 people, whichever is smaller. The mask rules that we previously had in the faith-based gatherings will remain unchanged. You're still required to wear a mask at all times other than when seated and not singing. Wedding and funeral group sizes are again reduced to 10. There's in addition to a photographer and an officiant. In addition, orders affecting retail locations and malls will come into effect as of midnight on Wednesday. Wanted to give just a little bit more time for the businesses to apply this. The capacity limits will reduce from 50% capacity or a maximum of 500 patrons to 1/3 capacity or a maximum of 333 patrons.
When it comes to loving your neighbor, is it all about just being neighborly, saying hello and loaning them your lawnmower? Linda McGibbon wrote a book called The Vertical Neighbor, and she says when it comes to loving your neighbor, it is much more deeper than that.
I think loving our neighbors is about seeing people, being present to them, treating them as sacred, treating them as really worthwhile. So it's a deeper thing than neighborliness, which maybe is a superficial hello, pass by on the street.
Catch the full interview with Linda McGibbon discussing the importance of loving thy neighbor, one of the commandments, coming up in the second half of our program. Well, we had another mild day in the Windy City with no snow or rain, but enjoy it while you can because more moisture is on the way. Full weather details are on deck. You know, the nice thing about all of the snow melting here in Lethbridge is that kids have a chance to pull out their sidewalk chalk and go to town. Check this out in the community of Riverstone. Some young people there decided to design a unique game of hopscotch. It's a nice way of taking you down memory lane. Look at all of that. If you live on the west side, it's a good way of getting outdoors and getting a little bit of exercise before the rain and snow comes by and washes it all away. Good memories. Fortunately, no snow or rain in the forecast tonight, just a few clouds developing with a low near -3. Tomorrow, it should be mainly sunny with a high near 17. A low pressure system returns on Thursday, bringing rain mixed with snow and a high of only 4 degrees. Pretty much the same picture on Friday and Saturday. Lots of clouds, a chance of moisture, and a high again near 4. Sunday, more rain is developing with a high near 6. Monday, a good chance of showers once again and a high of 9. The average high for this time of year is 14 degrees and an average low of 0. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1980 at 27 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -9 in 1951. The sun rose at 6:29 and sets at 8:32. The days are definitely getting longer. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. It should be partly cloudy in Victoria, BC with a high near 19, mainly sunny at 16 degrees for Vancouver. Just a few clouds and 17 for Calgary. Partly cloudy and 18 degrees for Edmonton. It'll be mainly sunny and 11 in Regina. Partly cloudy and 14 degrees for Saskatoon. Lots of sunshine and 13 for Winnipeg on Wednesday. Toronto had a weather advisory today. Tomorrow, clouds with a chance of snow and a high of 0. Periods of light snow and -1 for Ottawa. Light flurries and +2 for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, expect rain and 11 in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Mainly sunny at 17 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. A mixture of sun and cloud and 13 in Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a partly cloudy day with a high near 8 degrees on Wednesday.
Today's weather is brought to you by Jeff Reimer of Royal LePage South Country Real Estates, 403-380-1779.
Rogers Communications says the root cause of problems with its wireless service yesterday was a recent software update by its network partner, Ericsson. The nearly day-long outage left millions of customers across the country without access to voice calls, texting, and data services. Rogers executives say their company did not meet the level of service its customers have come to expect, but did not say if the affected customers would be offered any compensation. Experts say wireless interruption impacted business sales and service and could have also stoked concerns about telecommunications consolidation here in Canada. Amazon, one of the largest corporate purchasers of renewable energy in the world, announced its first such investment here in Canada. The company will acquire electricity from a new solar project in Newell County to be built by Greengate Power of Calgary. The announcement came at the same time Labatt Breweries of Canada unveiled a power purchase agreement with Edmonton-based Capital Power to buy electricity from the company's new Enchant solar facility located right here in southern Alberta. Over the past 3 years, around 12 large corporations have signed similar partnership agreements to acquire green power. The province's energy department says around $2 billion worth of renewable power developments have been unveiled since July of 2019. Canadian National Railway is making a bid to scoop up Kansas City Southern from rivals Canadian Pacific. Now, CN Rail made a cash and stock offer valued at $33.7 billion for the U.S. railway. That tops the $25 billion offer made by Canadian Pacific last month. CN officials say a merger with Kansas City Southern would create significant new revenue opportunities. When CP and KCS announced their friendly deal last month, they said it would create the first rail network connecting Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The agency that regulates drugs for the European Union says a warning about rare blood clots should be added to labels for Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine. The European Medicines Agency says the rare blood disorders should be considered very rare side effects of the vaccine. Last week, Johnson & Johnson delayed its rollout of the vaccine after U.S. officials recommended a pause in the vaccine. It followed 6 blood clot cases among nearly 7 million people who had been vaccinated. A new generation of startups wants to disrupt the construction industry by automating production with industrial 3D printers. They say 3D printing can help address housing shortages, along with making homes faster, cheaper, and greener.
So what we've done is with 3D printing, we're able to print exactly what we need. So it's effectively zero waste construction, meaning we're eliminating the 3 to 5 pounds per square foot that goes to landfill in a traditional build, which adds up to about 2 to 3 tons of carbon per unit. Additionally, we're lowering labor hours by about 90% per unit, but at the end of the day, we're actually hoping to create more work by increasing the productivity by as much as 20 times, and also helping address the fact that we don't have enough skilled labor to build all the housing we need.
Living room, bathroom, washer, dryer.
So we would like to build 15 lots, develop 15 lots that will have primary home and a secondary home on the same lot. We're utilizing the 3D printed panelized designs by Mighty Buildings. Those panels are built, printed in a factory in Oakland, then delivered on site, and on site they're assembled in a similar fashion like a Lego set. So it reduces the time that it takes to build a home significantly.
Gotta love modern technology. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 163 points on the day to finish at 19,041. The Dow was down 256 points to 33,821. The S&P 500 was down 28 points to 4135, and the Nasdaq was down 128 points on the day to 13,786. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 94 cents to 62.44 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 2 cents to 2.73 US. Gold was down 6 cents to 17.7869 US an ounce, and silver was up 2 cents to 25.84 US an ounce. Wheat is at $322 per metric ton, barley's at $332, canola's at $803, and corn is at $369 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 23 cents to 120.58, feeder cattle were down 15 cents to 137.58, and lean hogs were up 2.43 to 108.08. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.31 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the former Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, has been found guilty on all counts for his involvement in Floyd's death. He was found guilty on second and third degree murder charges and one of second degree manslaughter. Bail has been revoked for Chauvin, and his sentencing will take place in 8 weeks' time. Chauvin could face up to 75 years in prison. So what's the best way of reaching out and showing your neighbor that you care about them? Linda McGibbon wrote a book on the best way to love thy neighbor, and she'll have details for us in just a moment. We've all heard the famous words from Jesus to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, it sounds so good, but sometimes, depending upon who the neighbor is, it may be a little bit easier said than done. Joining me now from Toronto to chat about this is Linda McGibbon. She's the Vice President of People and Culture for InterVarsity Canada and author of the book, My Vertical Neighborhood, How Strangers Became a Community. Linda, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you. Really great to be here with you today.
Good to have you. Now, can you share a little bit about how this book came about? I understand you moved from a small town setting to a much larger, radically different area?
That's correct. I didn't set out to write the book. The book happened out of my life. So about 10 years ago, I was offered a transfer. I was working with InterVarsity at the time in the East Coast in New Brunswick, lived in the town of Moncton, New Brunswick. They asked me to move to Toronto, and I initially, like most East Coasters, said no. But the job intrigued me, and so I decided to make a shift. I was just about to turn 50 years old, so it was kind of a big life change for me. I lived in a house in a neighborhood in a rural, across the river from Moncton in a smaller suburb. And I made the move and ended up living in a condominium tower, about 26 stories on the shores of Lake Ontario. So a significant move just as I turned 50.
You know, I remember when I lived in Southern Ontario in Hamilton, I drove my kids all the way to Charlottetown, PEI, and back in 9 days. What an incredible adventure that was, a journey. But I do remember, Linda, when we stopped off in the Maritimes provinces, whether it was Halifax or we went to Cavendish Beach and PEI, the Maritimers were so friendly. I couldn't believe how friendly they were. And then when I came back to Southern Ontario, I'm like, wait a minute, and I'm in Toronto, they're not as friendly here. What's going on? Did you notice that as well? Small town compared to the metro center, people in the smaller towns are that much friendlier?
I would say yes and no. So, I'm a proud East Coaster, and I think we are a very friendly people. And Toronto is a huge multicultural city. So, yes, people dropped in on me more frequently, more easily, perhaps, because I knew them. And I think there is, in high rises in particular, perhaps a bit of a protocol that you follow because you live so close to each other. You try to be a bit more careful, but I don't know, I've been beginning to wonder if the friendliness factor has been decreasing all over the place. And so it's maybe a little harder wherever you live.
You know what's really sad is, it's very true. Here in Southern Alberta, when I used to live in Calgary, and I bought a house and I moved into this neighborhood, and I talked to my neighbor, he says, thank God you came out to say hi. I said, what do you mean? Well, the previous owner lived there 10 years, he never said hi to me once. I'm like, what? That's just, I can't even fathom that. That's unbelievable. Now, when people hear, love thy neighbor, what do you think that really means?
That's the question that I posed really when I started to write the story that's in the book. And I started to write the story within about 3 years of living into the story, and then I continued to write it for a long time. When I first came to Toronto, I came with the question, what would it look like to love my neighbors? Or what had happened if I followed this commandment? And then I started asking the question, what does love mean in the context of neighbors? And I can tell you some things that I don't think it means, or it doesn't mean in its entirety. I don't think it means in its entirety that you tolerate them, or that you notice them, or that you are kind to them even, or friendly, although it does mean all of those things. I think maybe a good place to start is 1 Corinthians 13, that beautiful chapter on love. Love is patient, love is kind, love perseveres. I think loving our neighbors is about seeing people, being present to them, treating them as sacred, treating them as really worthwhile. So it's a deeper thing than neighborliness, which maybe is a superficial hello, pass by on the street.
And I need to borrow your drill, or in the wintertime, I need to borrow your shovel, or maybe some sugar. That kind of helps too sometimes.
Yeah, those are starting points.
So Linda, you felt a calling to really love your neighbor, especially those you shared an apartment building with. How did you go about doing this? And did people kind of freak out a little bit when you reached out to them? Did you jump out and offer a hug prior to COVID?
Yeah, no, that's not my style. I wanted to do it, and I moved into the building and began to think about how could I do it and how could I leave space for it. I joined the gardening committee in the condo. I would go to the condo Christmas parties, but I wasn't really brave enough just to invite people into my apartment. I was living alone. It was like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I prayed a lot. I was friendly, but it actually took a colleague of mine moving into the building, Rachel, as she's called in the book. And she had a similar value for meeting people and inviting people in. And I discovered, it's a lot easier if there's two people. So whether it's a family, a couple, or a couple of neighbors who get together, it became much easier if together we offered invitations to people, two people living in a building saying, oh, we're doing something together. Do you want to join us? Was a whole lot easier. And just for me personally, less risky than doing it on my own.
You know, maybe that's the key there, Linda. You're right, is to get involved in maybe a group, perhaps. Let's say it's not as intimidating. Instead of just inviting somebody over to your house, like you said, in a gardening group, getting involved in the gardening community. That way you can kind of get to know people in a different setting, right? A more comfortable setting with more people around.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It starts slowly, but I believe that living into the commandment to love your neighbor as Jesus gave it to us, it does actually take more than me alone. You know, Jesus sent disciples out 2 by 2. We're taught so much to be in community, to be a people who go together. And it's just less tiring if you have a friend or a family member or a spouse or somebody who you can do that with.
What are some of the ways you discovered, Linda, to help people to bring down their walls, make it a safe place for people to really open up to you and be themselves?
I think a key is that I had to become a bit uncomfortable myself. So I couldn't be the person who had everything neat and tidy and never shared anything about myself or wasn't vulnerable, but actually had to be truthful and honest with people. I had to meet them kind of on their terms. So I tell some stories in the book where I thought that I could spend an hour with a new neighbor, but ended up spending a whole day, which was far beyond what I was expecting. But giving the gift of time, said to somebody, oh, I think I actually do matter to this person. I think asking questions of people, being curious, also is really helpful. People like to talk about themselves mostly. So if we ask them about themselves, start to learn and listen, and then ask more questions, I actually believe that also really helps people feel
Yeah,
seen,
you get to know
heard.
them a little bit better too at the same time. But Linda, let me ask you something. How many of us do you think are really lonely?
Well, it's probably a pandemic just like the COVID pandemic right now. And, you know, different parts of the world. In England, they created a minister of loneliness for the government. So I do believe that people are lonely. I don't think it's the only thing that people are looking for is companionship or friendliness, but I do believe that people feel increasingly isolated and increasingly lonely. I think it's a human condition. I tell stories in the book about my own sense of loneliness, even though I have friends, I have family, I have good connections with people, but we will all feel it in some way at some time in our life.
And doesn't it say in the Bible that no man is an island? I mean, no person should be an island. We need that human interaction. It makes it even more challenging during the pandemic with all of the restrictions and the lockdowns. What do you think it is, Linda, that our neighbors really need and what they're longing for, outside of sugar or maybe a snowblower?
Yeah. Another excellent question. And as I think about it, I think, wow, it's hard to stereotype. Some people do actually, and in my experience, some people wanted a really good friend that they could spend time with and do things with and have conversations with. Some people just wanted somebody who would check in on them every now and then, or be aware or help them move something. Some people want to have deep conversations, and some people do not. Some people just want, we did for a number of years a Monday night dinner where we just said, it's Monday night, it's the first night of the work week, you're back to, nobody wants to eat alone. So why don't we do Monday night dinners? And lots of people came to those Monday night dinners. I think people don't want to eat alone. They want to share a meal and talk about something. They want to laugh together. So people want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They want to be engaged with. But it's individual to each person. So again, that curiosity factor is pretty important as we get to know people.
So as you get to know your neighbor a little bit more and they want to have a deeper conversation with you, then all of a sudden you find out they have complete opposite interests to you. They're completely think different politically. They lean a completely different way. They may not be a Christian at all. In fact, they may even be an atheist. So how do you handle that situation? And they may even become a little aggressive in their conversation with you.
Absolutely. I think curiosity helps again, non-defensiveness, and just being prepared to be uncomfortable. Like I think in lots of situations I became uncomfortable, but then I want to ask the question, okay, why am I uncomfortable? Who is this person in front of me? Are they worth engaging with? Are they a real human person? Why do they think the way they do? What's going on with them? Asking those questions. Tell me what you believe. Why do you believe that? Can I tell you what I believe? Gee, it's really different than what you believe, but help me understand you. So I actually think it's engaging in conversation that's more than superficial, but not easy to do. Not easy to do.
I agree.
Helps to have friends to debrief with later.
And you know what's interesting too? Sometimes I find out that people who've walked away from the church, walked away from Christ, are people who are hurting in a very big way, you know, and they have that huge emptiness, that void that only God can fill. And so you have to understand where that pain and that suffering is coming from originally, so you can sympathize and be a sounding board and then be able to reach out to them in a loving way. Now, how about an offer to pray for someone? Have you ever been shot down in that regard?
Yes, I have. I have offered to pray for people and they've said, absolutely no, I don't want that. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Or you can pray for me by yourself, but don't pray for me like in front of me. That's really freaky. So generally, I don't know that anybody has ever said, don't pray for me on your own. Most people, even if they don't believe in God, well, if you believe in God, why not? You know, maybe, I don't know. So I think that I have had people say to me, oh, don't pray for me right now. And sometimes there's a story in the book where I actually go ahead and pray for somebody on a phone message. My friend Brian initially reacted with kind of horror that I had done that. But then he listened to the prayer and told me that it was helpful. So it's a risk to offer it, but I think it's a risk worth taking.
Yeah. Linda, once the provinces start opening up a little bit more and we have more freedom, you know, for worshiping, getting together in larger groups in churches, and you want to reach out to somebody, invite them to a church, how do you go about doing that? Because sometimes that can be an uncomfortable conversation for you and for the other person.
Yes, I think it comes up in conversations because you're talking about something else. Or sometimes you just tell a story to somebody like, oh, you know, I'm going back to church once church opens. I'm looking forward to it. I've had people say to me, oh, you go to church? Can I come with you sometime? And well, like, of course you can come with me. People are curious. So I think sometimes just telling people you do it yourself, I go to church, if you ever want to come with me, you're welcome to come. And maybe after things open up and people have been so isolated and have missed gathering together, people will have a little bit more interest in it, actually, as a place to go and be with people.
We need to be fed spiritually, and we need that human interaction, as you and I talked about. Linda, we only have about a minute left here. Any final thoughts on how to step out in faith, out of your comfort zone, and love thy neighbor?
Pray. You know, if you're afraid and nervous, I think that's a very normal way to feel. We all have fears about it, but take the commandment seriously. I think it's probably more necessary in our world now than we even could possibly imagine. And Christians know the command and probably should be following it.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. Amen. Linda McGibbon, she's the author of My Vertical Neighborhood, How Strangers Became a Community. Thanks for joining me today from Toronto.
Thanks very much.
Well, many of us love animals and have pets at home, but sometimes we may have more questions than answers as to how to care for them. Joining us today is Dr. Ian Gibson. He is a veterinarian with Ranch Docs Veterinary Services located just outside of Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Gibson. So good to have you on today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being with you guys.
Well, why don't we start with chatting a little bit about some seasonal issues for pets since it's spring now. So everyone loves springtime, but apparently pets can also struggle with allergies. So what are the symptoms to be on the lookout for, and what is the treatment?
So springtime brings a couple more allergens to the table. We've got pollen that's increasing. And that sort of can, if your pet does have a skin allergy, it can exacerbate it. And, you know, pets typically want to sort of lick their feet. They often scratch their ears, lick their abdomen. They might sort of, typical to humans, also start sneezing. So that's sort of the type of signs we see. You know, if you're dealing with sort of a skin sort of allergy, you might be okay to give your pet regular wash with shampoo, often a medicated shampoo wash. And if it's something more severe, you might want to consult your veterinarian, and there are actually specific products that we can give that can help with the allergies.
Oh, that's good to know. I know, like, we as humans often think of ourselves as getting allergies, and You know, we don't think of the animals. The poor little guys get allergies too. I know I have a cat that often sneezes, so maybe I should get that checked out.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I understand another thing to be watching out for is ticks, especially this time of year. So how can we prevent ticks from attaching to our pets, and how should you deal with it if they do get ticks?
Yeah, so with the warmer weather, the ticks are definitely moving. And the easiest way these days to manage ticks are they're just using a monthly tablet in dogs, and then a topical treatment in cats that also generally lasts about a month's time. And those treatments just prevent the pests from actually getting on the animal, and they can't bite the dog or the cat. And that's probably the easiest way to do it. If you forgot to give your pet maybe those treatments and there is potentially a tick on your dog, you can just kind of gently grab it close to the skin just behind the head and you can pull it off.
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. I remember our dog back at the cabin at the lake when I was growing up, and some of those ticks got pretty nasty. So I know what you're talking about with that. Now, we all like to spoil our pets since they are members of our families, and I'll bet a lot of us actually overfeed them. So how can you tell if they're being fed too much? What kinds of problems does this cause? And what advice do you have for pet owners to stick to the right amount of food?
Yes, I mean, obesity is probably one of the most common medical conditions we see with pets, and I mean, rightfully so. It's not always easy to know exactly how much you need to feed your pet because they're not able to tell you. But the main thing you need to look at is, the condition that your pet is in. We generally say if you sort of rub on the side of their chest, you kind of want to feel the ribs if you press firmly. And that sort of gives you an idea if your pet is in a good condition. The easiest way really is to feed your animal a good quality dry food, and most of those manufacturers will actually have some sort of description on the back of the bag, and that'll sort of tell you exactly how much you need to feed your pet per day. It gets a little bit more tricky if you're feeding, table food and things, because then, it's hard to quantify how much calories are in there. And then you might have to use a bit of common sense to sort of gauge how much you should give.
Okay, any advice on what ingredients to look for in cat food or dog food to make sure that they're getting good nutrition?
Um, Once again, the manufacturers that make these foods, they're the scientists and they come up with a balanced sort of diet. I would say, a good quality veterinary approved diet. So meaning a vet has sort of looked over the ingredients and nutritionists have looked at the ingredients and they've deemed it sort of balanced. That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
There's been a slight trend in recent years to feed grain-free food, but there's actually a substantial amount of studies that now show that these grain-free diets are actually bad for dogs and it can lead to heart disease. So that's just something to bear in mind.
Definitely. Now, we hear differing opinions on how many times per day to feed your cat or dog. So what is the correct answer on that one?
Most of the time, twice a day is fine, in the morning and in the evening. If you've got a little puppy and he's just a couple of weeks old, you might be better off feeding like 3 times a day. In saying that, a majority of dogs also do fine on once a day. There's not a real exact answer. It doesn't matter too much.
Okay, interesting. So how often should pets go for a checkup at the vet?
We would definitely recommend an annual checkup at least, and that's often accompanied by, vaccinations, deworming tablets, etc. If your animal is sort of towards the later years in their lives, every 6 months might even be a good idea. Things change a lot in animals. They don't live as long, so often things change quickly. So, yeah.
So every 6 months as the animal gets older?
Yeah, maybe towards the latter part of the life, in a dog, maybe anything upwards of 8 years. In a cat, maybe upwards of 12 years. You probably want to go for 6 monthly checkups.
Okay, interesting. Now, can you explain a little bit about parasites? What are they and how do they affect your pet? And how can we recognize it if our pet has them?
So we've got sort of two groups, external parasites, which kind of already touched on. That's your ticks and your fleas. And then internal parasites are going to be intestinal worms mainly, and your pet can pick that up from just going to the park and sniffing around and licking things. They can pick up eggs, and the worms can actually develop in their digestive tract. So that's why we recommend, especially in the summer, to do maybe 2 dewormings. In the winter, you might be okay with just 1 or so.
Okay. How, in what way do they affect your pet? Does the pet act differently at all? How can you tell if he has it?
Sometimes a little bit hard to know.
Yeah.
Once the infestation gets really bad, you might see things like diarrhea as the worms irritate the inside of the gut lining. And some worms actually suck the blood out of the pets, and they can sort of get anemic, so get a little bit weaker. Yeah.
Okay, so keep an eye out for that, definitely.
Yeah, hopefully we don't get to that stage.
Yeah, for sure. No, so what are the best types of treatments for these parasites? And is there a certain time of year that they come out, or are they just present all the time? It could be at any point.
Mainly in the warmer months, the warmer months from now on, for October, that's sort of the main time that they'll be active. So you definitely want to worm your pet, probably twice during these warmer months.
Wow. Okay. Now, what about vaccinations? How important are they?
Well, they're very important and quite topical in this day and age with us dealing with our own viruses. But we recommend annual vaccinations, and then as the patients sort of get a little bit older, some of these vaccines can last for up to 3 years. We do rabies vaccinations, and then there's a parvo vaccine, and also a kennel cough vaccine for dogs. And then the cats also have their own specific vaccine.
All right. Okay. Talk to us a little bit about spaying or neutering your pet. How important is this?
Well, we all know that all the shelters are overrun with dogs waiting for homes. So the general recommendation, we feel like there's probably enough animals around. So that's one of the sort of reasons why you'd want to spay your animal. There's also sort of health benefits to doing that, especially sort of later in life. You know, animals often get issues towards the older years. If they're intact, infections in their uterus, they can get prostate issues. So there are some benefits with regards to longevity, which makes sense to do to spay your animal.
That's really interesting. What would the cost be for getting this done?
It really varies from clinic to clinic. Dog spay might be a couple $100, and cat operations are generally a little bit less because they're a little bit easier, I guess.
Right. Now, I mean, sometimes we think of our pets as our kids. So if we are parents, we all know we need to spend time with our kids. So what about time with our pets? Does spending time with our pets improve their health?
Well, we definitely know that it improves our health, but absolutely, spending good quality time with your pet at least once a day is essential. They suffer from boredom, they suffer from loneliness, and a lot of behavioral issues that develop is just due to lack of attention. They are social animals. My advice would be, rather than regarding you sitting on the couch watching TV with your pet for 4 hours, as much as you feel like you're spending time with them, they will benefit more from it if you actually spend maybe 30 minutes a day of quality time where you're absolutely dedicated to them, possibly doing training exercises or going for a walk where you're just focused on them. That's been shown to be sort of more beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Can animals develop habits over boredom, like overeating, for example?
They can, if that's the only thing they can keep themselves busy with is eating, they might go down that track. Some of them develop other vices like chewing your fancy shoes or doing other things that you might not find helpful. So, occupying them with things that you'd like them to be entertained with is a good idea.
Absolutely. We have a cat who's constantly sitting at the food dish meowing at us, letting her, like, we're like, well, there's no way she could still be hungry. So we're just thinking she's eating out of boredom, kind of almost like a human trait, right?
It could be, yeah. So I mean, you could always get a few little toys. Cats like little feathers and things and they love chasing things. So there's a bunch of things you could probably try to keep her entertained.
Any advice for people who have to leave their pet at home alone all day?
Yeah, so that's a challenging, aspect of owning a pet. Most people have to go to work. When you have a young animal, so a puppy or a kitten, they often can't deal with that separation early on in their lives, and it's important to note that, and actually try maybe go home at lunchtime, spend a bit of time with a puppy, and that way they don't develop this sort of anxiety of being alone. And towards, once they mature, they're probably okay to spend the day at home, alone. But you just don't want them to sort of develop this absolute separation anxiety every time you leave. So there's a little bit of training involved with that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're like little children in so many aspects, aren't they?
Very much so.
Now, what advice or precautions do you have for anyone who wants to go to the animal shelter and get a cat or dog for their child?
Yeah, so that's definitely the first place I would go and look. Those dogs are really waiting for a home, and there's so much of them that really deserve a home. In saying that, if you're getting a pet for your child, and there's some other sort of considerations you want to take into account, depending on how small your child is. A very boisterous dog might be too much for a little baby, and you might want sort of a more of a gentler pet. Um, so I would probably recommend going to the shelter and maybe spending a day there with whatever animal you're interested in, going home, thinking about it, and then maybe going again and visiting it again. And it's a very big investment. You're going to be having this pet in your household for the next 10, 15 years. So you really want to make sure you pick the right one. So maybe a little bit of patience before making that final decision. But yeah, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I've often heard that it's not a good idea necessarily to buy an animal at Christmas time. I think the shelters are kind of saying that that's a no-no. Why is that?
I think it's, when people get an animal when emotions are at play, it's much the same when you sort of overrun and you buy a new Harley Davidson and then a week later you don't really want it anymore. So I think that's important for owners to realize there's a large sort of sense of responsibility when you actually get an animal and they're going to form part of your life. A cat can live up to 20 years and dogs can live up to 15 years. So you almost have to think years in advance. Am I still going to have the time? Am I still going to have the finances to look after this little fur baby? Yeah.
Yes, good point. Think long term with that. Any advice if you have a newborn in the house? I had heard that newborn babies, and it might not be safe to have a cat near them. Any advice on that?
It really depends on the cat. Some cats can really play rough, and they might scratch the baby, not out of bad intentions, but just playing. But you also get lots of cats, the most gentle giants, and they'll be fine with a little baby. I don't think there's any health issues besides maybe.
Maybe it was an old wives' tale. I had heard that cats like to maybe lay across them because of the warmth and it could suffocate them. So,
Not that I've heard.
all right. Well, it looks like we are out of time, but thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Gibson.
No, it's a pleasure. It was good chatting to you guys.
Thank you. Dr. Ian Gibson is a veterinarian with Ranch Docs Veterinary Services located just outside of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.